Hey there, American history peeps. We are now talking about the 1920s and the presidency. Today we're going to talk about is Warren G. Harding. He coins an important phrase that we still use today during his 1920 campaign, and it is a return to normalcy. Nobody had heard of that word until he used it. So, normalcy in government. The 1920s election of Warren G. Harding, he wanted simpler days, the days before World War I and the days before we got involved in the world. We see a new tariff being passed. It's called the Fordney-McCumber tariff. And as you see, it raises tariffs about 60%. Britain and France turn to Germany to pay their debts, and Germany will default on their debts. When Germany defaults on their debts, French troops will invade parts of Germany, the Ruhr region. To avoid war, we were looking at World War II. To avoid war, a U.S. banker, Charles Dawes, is sent over by the Harding administration to devise this plan to keep Europe from war. So what happens is the U.S. banks loan Germany $2.5 billion to pay Britain and France. In turn, Germany would repay the U.S. Of course, Britain and France don't like this because they're still in the mode of make Germany pay for what they did in World War I, which was to fight against them. And so they didn't like it, but who cared? We did it anyway, and that's how it worked. Nativist policies are going to start to become national policy. The National Origins Act basically puts a quota system on immigrants from Europe, and it's discriminatory quotas on immigration. So as this political cartoon shows here, we're going to stop immigration from Europe to a trickle. Not many people are going to get in. So this was signed by Harding in 1921. 3% of the total number of people in any one ethnic group already living in the U.S. in 1910 would be allowed in 1 year in 1921. So this severely restricts all immigration. The National Origins Act is passed by Congress in 1924, and this makes immigration worse. 1924 puts permanent restrictions on immigrants, and it changed the quota to 2% instead of 3%, and it goes from the 1890 census instead of the 1910. So it goes 20 years previous. In 1929, basically immigration was reduced to about 150,000 people total throughout the 1920s. So, interestingly enough, Hispanic immigrants, they were exempted from the National Origins Act. They came for jobs on the southwestern farms, and over 600,000 will immigrate to the U.S. over the next 10 years. So this is a policy we need to teach you guys in high school. We need to teach you isolationism, but it's really unilateralism. It's a one-sided foreign policy, and it's our first foreign policy that George Washington used. Isolationism, you need to know, keeps us isolated from the world, but we're really not isolated. As I've just talked to you, we actually sent a banker overseas to discuss a treaty or discuss a payment plan with Germany, Britain, and France. So it's a one-sided foreign policy, and isolationism is a part of it. So we just look for things that benefit the U.S. So isolationist policies with the economy and arms control. If you look at the Washington Conference's post-war arms race was developing, and we didn't want that. So the U.S. and 8 other major countries discussed disarmament. In November 1921, basically it proposes a 10-year pause on construction of any new warships and the destruction of warships that were over the quota. The conference's shortcomings: it did nothing to limit land forces. Japan required to maintain a smaller navy than the U.S. or Britain, so they're going to have resentment toward that because they're seen as inferior. And of course, 1929, we're going to talk about the Kellogg-Briand Pact. This outlaws war and says it is illegal to start a war, settle disputes by peaceful means only. We negotiate this one as well. There's a number of other nations sign it, so we are involved in world politics. This is a political cartoon of the Warren Harding administration selling Washington off. The Harding administration was a very corrupt administration. Although prosperity is going to return to the U.S., he made some good and bad appointment choices. Herbert Hoover, Secretary of Commerce, that was a good choice. The Ohio gang, as you see in the picture here to your left, these are his poker playing friends, and a lot of these guys are going to have administrative positions, and they're going to let him down as far as scandals. They basically they're going to take money from the government. The Forbes scandal, medical supplies allowed VA hospitals to overcharge the government $250,000. The one that you need to know that's underlined in bold here is the Teapot Dome scandal in Wyoming and Elk, California. Secretary of Interior Albert Fall, he let the government-owned land, which had oil on it, as you see, he let this be leased out to private companies for far less than its value. These oil reserves were for our Navy, and as you see here, it cost us $300,000. Albert Fall was actually sent to prison for this, and the Harding administration is extremely embarrassed. However, Harding doesn't have to answer any questions because he dies en route to California before the scandal really broke out. Labor unrest. Working conditions were not good. Not getting paid as much. As you see, I'm tired. You see the picture over here. I'm tired. I'm sick of this nonsense. So as you see, strikes in the late 18-teens, Boston police strike. This is where Calvin Coolidge is going to get a name for himself as governor of Massachusetts. He's able to put that down. The U.S. Steel strike, coal miner strike, Seattle general strike. Everybody went on strike. Then you have labor unions are going to be weakened by the war effort, open shop, and welfare capitalism. The Red Scare of the 19-teens, the Russian Revolution in 1917, Vladimir Lenin and the communists take over a country, and they have a cry for worldwide communist revolution. So those fears make their way over here to the U.S. We have the U.S. Communist Party established for many years. The IWW, that's a labor union we've already talked about, but here's the socialist movement. And you have anarchist people trying to overthrow the government. So it looks like in this time, it looks like a anarchist communist takeover, and the U.S. was at war with this as well. At the end of World War I. So the Palmer raids, Attorney General Mitchell Palmer, seen here to your right, his house is bombed by communists, believed to be communists or anarchists, and if he would have been in the front parlor at the time he usually is, they had a late dinner that night, him and his family would have probably been killed. It was not a small bomb. J. Edgar Hoover, who founded the FBI, worked under Palmer, and he set out to, with Palmer's direction, to find these anarchists and anybody who's a threat to our country, and we're going to deport them. As you see, this violates a lot of our civil liberties. Contained possible anarchist group, no hearing, no lawyers, no search warrant. We detain and deport them, but this is how Hoover makes a name for himself, and when they go on to develop the FBI in the late 1920s, 1930s, he'll be the guy tapped for the job, mainly because of what he does here. So to carry on with the anti-immigrant sentiment here in the U.S., We have the Sacco and Vanzetti case, Nicola Sacco and Bartholomew Vanzetti. As you see, one's a shoemaker, the other one's a fish peddler. They are convicted of killing a payroll clerk in southern Massachusetts. They were executed in 1927. Come to find out, they were not involved in it, and they were innocent the whole time. So we did execute a couple of men who were innocent. The new KKK. The growth of the Klan. Remember, KKK doesn't exist until 1915 with the movie The Birth of a Nation that glorifies the KKK. It's our very first full-length motion picture. And by the mid-20s, we've got 4.5 million people marching. So for all of you out there who said that technology and all this stuff doesn't affect you, the very first movie created the KKK again, or recreated the KKK again. Includes Jews, who they hated. Include Jews, Catholics, immigrants, any un-Americans. They opposed unions. They were seen as un-American. They helped enforce prohibition. And they feared African Americans. Basically, advantage and social changes. They didn't agree with any upward movement of African Americans. The Red Scare helped the KKK. They were slow to emerge, but with all of the anarchy and un-American activities, people went to the KKK because they saw that this was a way to kind of strike out and, kind of like in the 1860s, strike some fear into all these un-Americans. That's how they saw it. As a matter of fact, I told you earlier, by 1924, 4.5 million members, the largest it's ever been. And they marched down Pennsylvania Avenue, as you see in the pictures to your right. So, when immigration laws were strengthened, this really kind of hurt the KKK, and they started. So, Harding dies in office, and Calvin Coolidge replaces him. Coolidge wanted to distance himself from the scandal of Teapot Dome and all the other scandals, so, that was Harding's thing, not his. He wins re-election, or he wins election. He promised normalcy. One of his campaign slogans was "Keep Cool" with Coolidge, and another one was "Do Nothing Cow." That wasn't necessarily his, but prosperity rested on business leadership, so government is going to be removed from business, laissez-faire practices, basically pre-1880s kind of philosophy here. Job as president was to make sure that the government interfered with business as little as possible. So that's his belief. Moving forward. Andrew Mellon, wealthiest man of his time, so you don't have to worry about him stealing any money. He will be the Secretary of Treasury. He balances the budget, reduce taxes or reduce the debt, cut taxes, and the government he uses government business policies. Basically the use of business policies in government. He is one of the ones who creates the supply side economics. Lower taxes, people spend more money. Economy grows, government collects more taxes. Herbert Hoover, Secretary of Commerce, he believes in cooperative individualism. Businesses form trade associations that would voluntarily share information with the federal government, reduce cost, economic efficiency. It all sounded good.